You're 35,000 feet in the air when the man in seat 12B stands up. He's been quiet the entire flight, normal looking, ordinary. Then he reaches into his jacket and everything changes. "This is a hijacking," he says calmly to the flight attendant. Passengers on Frontier Flight 2539 experienced something similar when someone made a verbal bomb threat during landing in Atlanta. Authorities quickly determined it wasn't credible, but for those terrifying minutes, 147 people wondered if they'd make it home alive. That moment when you realize you're no longer a passenger but a hostage changes everything. Your brain goes into overdrive, your heart races, time slows down, and suddenly, you're trapped in a metal tube with someone who holds your life in their hands. Welcome to the psychology of being hijacked at 35,000 feet. The first thing that happens during a hijacking is disbelief. Your mind simply cannot process what's happening. This person who checked in at the gate just like you, who walked down the same jetway, who sat 3 rows behind you complaining about the peanuts, is now threatening everyone on board. This cognitive dissonance is exactly what happened to passengers on TWA Flight 847 in June 1985. Mohammed Ali Hamadeh stood up during a routine Athens to Rome flight, brandished grenades and pistols, and suddenly 153 ordinary travelers became hostages. Captain John Testrake later described the moment as surreal, like watching a movie happen to someone else. But this wasn't a movie. For 17 horrific days, Hamadeh forced the pilot to crisscross the Mediterranean, from Beirut to Algiers and back again, landing in Beirut 3 times while passengers wondered if each landing would be their last. During those first moments of a hijacking, passengers experience what psychologists call the 5F response: fight, flight, freeze, flop, or friend. Most people freeze. They simply cannot believe what's happening. Their minds shut down because the situation is so far outside normal experience. Flight attendant Uli Derrickson was working TWA 847 that day. She later recalled how passengers sat in stunned silence as the hijackers tied them up and began beating them. The terrorists threatened to kill passengers unless hundreds of Lebanese prisoners were released from Israeli jails. The psychological manipulation was deliberate. Keep the hostages off balance. On June 15th, during their first stop in Beirut, 23-year-old Robert Statham, a U.S. Navy diver from Waldorf, Maryland, was severely beaten by Hamadeh and his accomplice. He was dragged to the opened aircraft door, shot point blank in the head, and thrown onto the tarmac below. The message to other passengers was clear: compliance or death. This is the reality of being trapped on a hijacked plane. You're no longer in control of anything. Not when you eat, not where you sit, not whether you live or die. Between 1968 and 1972, passengers experienced this terror on an almost weekly basis. The world saw 326 hijack attempts during that period. That's one every 5.6 days. Passengers boarding flights in those years never knew if they'd reach their destination or end up in Cuba, Algeria, or worse. The psychological impact on passengers during these incidents is profound. Dr. Philip Baum, an aviation security expert, has studied the long-term effects on hijacking survivors. Victims often suffer psychological trauma that lasts years. Some develop severe anxiety disorders. Others never fly again. Flight attendants and pilots frequently leave the profession, unable to cope with the stress of knowing it could happen again on any flight. But the human mind is remarkably adaptable, even in the most extreme circumstances. During longer hijackings, passengers develop survival strategies. They begin to read their captors, looking for signs of mood changes or opportunities. They form bonds with other passengers, creating support networks even in the most hopeless situations. On November 23, 1996, passengers on Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961 experienced this psychological evolution firsthand. 3 men stormed the cockpit 20 minutes after takeoff from Addis Ababa, claiming they had a bomb. They beat the pilot and demanded to be flown to Australia. Captain Loyal Abate tried to reason with the hijackers, explaining that they didn't have enough fuel to reach Australia. The hijackers refused to listen. For hours, passengers watched this psychological chess match play out between their captain and their captors, knowing their lives hung in the balance. During these extended situations, passengers often develop what psychologists call Stockholm Syndrome. forming emotional bonds with their captors. This survival mechanism helps hostages cope with the powerlessness of their situation. They begin to see their hijackers as protecting them from even worse fates, even though the hijackers are the source of the threat. The confined space of an aircraft cabin intensifies every emotion. Fear becomes claustrophobic. Hope feels desperate. Despair crushes. You're breathing recycled air with people who might kill you. The walls close in and time stretches endlessly. During the Dawson's Field hijackings in September 1970, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine simultaneously seized 4 planes and forced 2 to land at a desert airstrip in Jordan. 310 passengers were kept in the desert heat for days. They described the experience as psychological torture, never knowing if the next moment would bring rescue or execution. The hijackers deliberately blew up the empty planes in front of the hostages, a psychological tactic designed to demonstrate their willingness to destroy everything. Food and water become weapons during hijackings. Hijackers control when and if passengers eat or drink. Even your most basic human needs are now subject to someone else's whims. Sleep becomes impossible. How do you close your eyes when someone with a gun is pacing the aisles? During the Air France Flight 139 hijacking in June 1976, passengers experienced this psychological roller coaster for 7 days. The terrorists separated Jewish and Israeli passengers from the others, keeping them under constant guard while others were released. For those marked for continued captivity, the psychological message was devastating. Your religion or nationality has made you expendable. The aircraft cabin becomes a pressure cooker of human emotion. A hijacker's laugh can signal safety. A frown might mean death. You become a student of micro-expressions, desperately trying to read the minds of unstable people with deadly weapons. During the 1985 hijacking of Egypt Flight 648, armed terrorists separated passengers based on nationality. When Egyptian special forces stormed the aircraft, they opened fire indiscriminately. 57 passengers died in the rescue attempt. The psychology of hijacking reveals fundamental truths about human nature under extreme stress. We discover reservoirs of courage we didn't know we possessed, and learn that survival often depends more on mental resilience than physical strength. For passengers on Frontier Flight 2539 last week, the experience lasted only minutes before authorities determined the threat wasn't credible. But those minutes provided a glimpse into a psychological hell that thousands of other passengers have endured for days or weeks. Today's enhanced security measures make hijackings far less likely, but they can't erase the fundamental vulnerability we feel when we surrender control to others. The psychological terrorism of the hijacking era is largely behind us, but its lessons about human resilience remain relevant. If you want to see how modern aviation security evolved from these terrifying incidents, hit subscribe for more deep dives into the human mind under pressure.